Make sure we are connected here. Okay. So I want to talk today, and would you kind of fan those out for me? I want to talk today about the scientific method. The scientific method. And we're going to have a little note to fill in. I should tell you that I do kind of a combination. Sometimes I will do a blank note and expect you to follow along on lined paper. Like today, I will give you a handout that's ready to be filled in. It just kind of depends on what I think is most appropriate for the day, if that makes sense. I think that there's a lot of value. There's a lot of cognitive research. There's a lot of studies that have shown that the act of writing something out really does help us learn. That process, there is a connection between the physical motion of making ourselves write and the language center of our brain that learned how to write and the portion of our brain responsible for concepts and understanding ideas and things like that. Those are all interconnected. So the act of copying something down really does help us learn it. It does help us cement it. If you're ever trying to memorize, I don't even know if they still make you memorize. When I was in high school English, we had to like memorize passages from Shakespeare and we had to memorize poems. And we learned early on that the best way to do that is to write it out, to say it out loud, and to read it. Kind of that combination of the three really does help us learn things. Having said that, today I did kind of half of the writing for you. Let me ask you, have you guys heard the phrase, the scientific method before? Yeah, that sounds familiar. What do you think of when you hear that? What's it bring to mind? Yeah.
Sciencey stuff.
Sciencey stuff, good. That's a good answer. Definitely sciencey stuff. Definitely. So the method scientists use, for sure. Yeah, with maybe different kinds of tests. Those are all good answers. The scientific method, and I'm sorry, I'm going to move this for you. This is great. The scientific method is a really broad category, but it's what we've been talking about, which is if I teach you anything in this class, I don't really care if 10 years from now you remember what order the planets go in, or which is the biggest planet. I bet you will, because these things tend to stick in your mind. But that's not really what I care about. You know, and I don't care if you can memorize the first 20 elements on the periodic table. In 20 years, that's not going to mean anything to you. In 5 years, it's not going to mean anything to you. In fact, in the chemistry, it's not going to mean anything to you. Blandly memorizing something like that may be of interest. Memorization is a useful thing. But what I really want you to take away from this class, whether you become a scientist, or whether you become like an investment banker, or a mechanic, or an engineer, or a stay-at-home mom, or a stay-at-home dad, or whatever it is you become, the scientific method, learning to think how scientists think, that's the important part, right? Science, yes. That's stretching. Not like getting ready to throw something. I'm just like warming up. Bro. Science is one of the great human achievements, which is to say living things have been on this planet for about living things have been like mammals on the planet for about 65, 70 million years. Living things that are even smaller and less complex have been on the planet for almost 1 billion years. Long time. But it's only in the last few thousand years that we developed something like science, that we developed a way of looking at the world. And you will notice that no dinosaurs ever built a spaceship and landed it on Mars. Didn't happen, that we know. You know, you'll watch these documentaries, and we're going to watch some in our ecology unit, and they talk about like apes are amazing because they can make simple tools, like, you know, taking a stick and poking it into an anthole and using that to pull out ants so they can eat it. And it's like, okay, I guess that's impressive. We've sent people to the moon where they walk around a bit, then drove around in a little golf cart, and got back in a spaceship and like flew back to Earth. It's a lot more impressive than putting a stick in an anthole and then eating the ants off it, right? We can agree on that? And even if you don't think you're interested in science, and I think a lot of people don't, a lot of people think, well, I don't care about science. I bet you like your phone, if you have one. I bet you like your computer at home. I bet you like your PS4, your Xbox, or your Switch. I don't know, whatever it is people play video games on. I bet you're looking forward to one day driving a car. I know I certainly was at your age. Owning your own car, all these things, none of which would be possible without science. Does that make sense? All of those things happen because we as a species learn to look at the world around us and use the scientific method. And likewise, you live in an amazing time. Like I have right here in my pocket access to everything that's ever been written down by a human being that still exists. If I want to read the collective works of Shakespeare, I don't even have to type. I could say, hey, Google, read me Romeo and Juliet, and it'll read it out loud to me. A computer, it's amazing. If I want to read Plutarch's Fables, they're on here. Or if I want to read 1970s X-Men, because I think that's peak, that's in here too, right? Like it's all there. Whatever your interest is, it's all in one place. That's crazy. And you take it for granted because you just grew up with these things, right? You grew up knowing that if you want to read something, you can go to Google and type it in and click OK, and there it is. Well, that's a brand new thing. You have access to every thought that's ever been conceived by human beings and written down. And you're playing a Gario, but that's okay. Right? A Slitherio, is that the one with the snakes? Addictive, that Slitherio. But what I want to say is this. No people have ever had more access to more information, which is incredible. You are alive in the most interesting time there's ever been to be alive. And that's pretty cool. You know, and by the time I'm dead and gone and you're still hanging around, you're going to see things get discovered and figured out and understood in fields of science and engineering and technology and exploration that never were. My great-grandmother's still alive. She's 106. And in her lifetime, just in her lifetime, they went from like there being a handful of automobiles, but nobody had ever seen one, to everyone has an automobile, to people fly on jets, to people landed on the moon, to the internet gets invented. And that's one lifetime, one generation, which is an incredible thing. So there have never been people in human history who are able to know as much as you were able to know, because anything you want to know, you can just find like that. Amazing stuff, right? There's a flip side to that, though. There's also never been more lies thrown at people constantly. I don't know if people still use Facebook, but you go on Facebook and you see people share the most bizarre things that just aren't true. You know, and you see things get thrown around like scientific facts that just aren't. And even by scientists. You'll read in the news and it'll say scientists have just found that coffee prevents cancer. And then a month later, you'll see an article that says scientists have shown that caffeine can cause cancer. And you'll go, but I thought the other one said it prevents it. And you go, what is going on? There's such a barrage of information, often contradictory, some of it true, some of it false, some of it very well researched, some of it horribly researched. And people will tell you, vaccinate your children, it prevents diseases, which is true. And somebody will say, you don't vaccinate your children, it causes autism, which isn't true. How do you know which one? How do we know? Is the answer, well, Mr. Orlando told me? Well, who am I? I'm a guy in a cheap shirt. I was going to say tie, but I'm not even wearing a tie today. You have to learn for yourself how to think about things. Does that make sense? And that's really what science class is and should be about. It's about learning to look at the world around you and evaluate information. So with that in mind, what we're going to talk about today is how scientists do that. When somebody who thinks like a scientist, and by the way, that doesn't mean you have to be a scientist. It doesn't mean you have to be a guy in a white lab coat with crazy hair. But when people who think scientifically want to know about something, we use something called the scientific method. And it's something that we've been perfecting for a long time, and I'm sure we'll get better at in your lifetime, and even better at in your children's lifetime, and so on and so forth. So, having said all that, there's a few basic steps that we always try to follow. So let me ask you this. What does all scientific reasoning start with? What's got to be the first thing, the first step? Sure, a question. I like it. What comes before a question? Maybe, could. I'm going to argue the hypothesis comes after the question, but what comes even before that? Even before we ask the question, what has to be true? Information. We're surrounded by it, sure. An idea, we're getting there. Even before an idea. That hopefully shouldn't come first. We do that a lot. We start with an idea, and we start with an answer, and then we try to prove it, and that's okay, but even better, sometimes, I'm going to suggest something to you. Don't write this, by the way. Give me 2 seconds. 2 seconds, and then you can go. I just want to get this across. The first step is ignorance. The first thing you have to do before you can be smart is be stupid. I'm very good at that step. No, the first step is not knowing something, isn't it? If we already knew everything there is to know, would we have to do science? Of course not. Guys who have to go, you can go. So it starts. All right. P to S. P, Q, R, and S. Okay, so we're going to kind of keep going here, and people can follow along when they get back. The first thing we always start with is a problem of some sort. Something we don't understand or something we don't know. Yeah, this we can write. All science starts with something we don't know. It starts with something we want to know about, right? In other words, it starts with our ignorance. And that's not a bad thing. It's important to be humble enough to acknowledge that we are ignorant. I know a lot less than I don't know. There's a lot more things out there to know than I know. You know, I took science for 4 years in high school, and I did 5 years of it at university, so 9 years of studying. And then I've gone back and done maybe a half dozen courses since. Do I know everything about science? Of course not. Absolutely not. I know more than you do. That's why I get to stand up here and be the teacher. But then when I take the course, there's somebody who knows a lot more than I do standing in front of me. And at some point, somebody who knew a lot more than him was standing in front of him, right? And when you get to university, the people at the front, well, they're the ones out there actually finding out the new things. They're the ones doing the research. We're always learning new things. So it starts with a problem. And then from there, somebody said this great second word, which is important. After a problem, we have to turn that into a question. And not all questions are created equally. Not so much today, but in future class, in a couple classes from now, we're going to talk about how to make good scientific questions. What makes a good question that science can work with really well. But for now today, we'll just say, once we know what we don't know, we're going to ask a question. If the problem is, geez, I don't know anything about space, the question might be, what is space like? There we go. That's our question. Does that make sense? And then somebody, you guys are good, because somebody even said this word, the H word. After we have a question, what do we get? A hypothesis. That's a very fancy sounding word. What's it mean? Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad answer. I'm going to say a best guess to answer your question. Is everyone comfortable if I put the letter Q for question? That's not stressing anybody out? You can tell me if it is. So the problem is, hey, there's this thing I don't know about. Question is, how does that thing work? And now the hypothesis is, well, I think maybe it might work this way. Does that make sense? And then, once we've done that, only once we've done that, we're ready to actually go and learn about that thing. We're ready to go find out if that particular hypothesis is right or wrong. Does that make sense? And that's where, data is a great word. I'm going to use the word research, but it's the same idea. This is where we're going to do some kind of research. And that research could look like a lot of different things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we start with a problem, we ask a question, we come up with an answer we think we might be true, and then we start doing some research. And we're going to do as much research as we can, and we're going to learn about how we design our research. And then once we've done that, we're going to try to reach some kind of conclusion. And specifically, and this is maybe something that hasn't been stressed with you before, and that's okay. I always feel like I'm coming down on elementary school teachers, and I want to be really clear. I tremendously admire elementary school teachers. Those guys have to know everything. They have to teach you about English one period, and then math the next period, then history the period after that, then science the period after that, and it sounds like chaos to me. Can't believe that anyone can do that job. I couldn't do that job. But I do know a lot about science, because that's what I teach. So here's the specific thing. When we reach a conclusion, what we're really saying is, was our hypothesis proven correct? That's really the only question we can ask. Every time we do science, we start with a hypothesis, our best guess. We do research, and then we say, okay, did my research say that, yeah, your guess makes sense? If the answer is yes, then we go, great, hey, it looks like I found a possible answer. What if it said no? What if I do all this research and it's like, oh, you know what, your hypothesis looks sketchy, doesn't look good. What would I have to do then?
Make another question?
Yeah, or maybe the same question, but make another hypothesis. And say, okay, that first idea I had wasn't a good one, it wasn't right. That's okay, I can set that one aside. Now maybe I think, what if this other thing is true? And then I can do it again. I can start with a new hypothesis, I could do new research, and then I can try the conclusion again. Does that make sense? So conclusion isn't necessarily about finding out what's true. It may be about finding out that your idea wasn't a good one. That's okay, that's good science. Does that make sense? And these are the steps of the scientific method. We come across some kind of problem, we ask a question about that problem, we come up with the best answer we think we can, then we go out and we study it like crazy, and then we ask, having done all this research, does my answer make any kind of sense? Was it a good answer? And that's science. And that, by the way, that's science, but like you should also do that if you're going to buy a car. What kind of car should I get? Well, hypothesis. I think maybe this is a good car. Research. Oh, hey, it says they break down all the time and they have crappy resale value and people like to steal them and birds especially like to crap on me. Okay, that's not my car. Did my research, didn't get my hypothesis, didn't like it. We go back and we try again. Does that make sense? Cool. Now, today, what I want to focus on is this. Today, I want to focus on the research portion of this. We will have other days where we talk about the other things. How do we collect data? How do we do research? Sure, we ask questions, we try to find out. What might your first step be? If you have a question, you know, hey, why is the sky blue? What might be the first thing you do? Yeah, you bet. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. The first thing we do is literature research. We look to see if other people have studied this. We look to see if other people have studied our problem, our question. Does that make sense as a first step? Realistically, if I'm wondering why the sky is blue, am I going to go out and buy like mirrors and lasers and you know, start doing like primary research out there about sky blueness? I could. I'd be awesome if I did, but probably I'm not. Probably I'm going to punch it into Google or Wikipedia. Does that make sense? So these are examples of where we might look. In our day-to-day lives, we might look at Google. Got to be careful looking at Google. All kinds of stuff comes up. Might be true, might be completely false, might be somebody trying to sell you something. You can look at Wikipedia, much better, because at least on Wikipedia, you're allowed to fight about what's true. You can post something and I can go on and post the opposite and we can have a big disagreement about it. Everybody gets involved and you can actually, if you ever look, sometimes you'll be on a Wikipedia thread and it'll say like, there's disagreement about this, and you can click and you can read everyone's thoughts on it. Wikipedia teachers, we have a habit of like saying like, that's a terrible resource. It's actually an excellent resource. It really is, it's great. You should look to see where they're getting their information, but it's very good. For scientists, we tend to I'm not a scientist, I'm a science teacher, but scientists do their research and they publish them in something called journals, research journals. So if you were a scientist who studied the human heart, you would subscribe to all these journals, like about the human heart. And every month you'd get these delivered to you, and it would show you everybody's research that they're doing every month on the human heart. You can look through and see what other scientists are doing, what their research looks like. That's how science works. They communicate with each other about stuff. Does that make sense? So that's the first step. We can do literature research. We can see what other people have done. What's the other thing we can do? It's written down. Yeah, we can do experiments. What's an experiment? Yeah, for sure. What is an experiment? What's that mean? What do you think of when you hear that word? Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yeah, to test things. Yeah. What do you think? Yeah, to prove if it's right or wrong and to do it ourselves, right? Not to look if someone else has done it, but to ourselves do it. Those are all good answers. So this is hands-on research. The other thing about an experiment is that you are in control of things. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If we are studying something truly awful like cancer, if we want to do an experiment, would we do a cancer experiment on human beings? No. Because would it be ethical to give people cancer to see what happens? No, of course not. Right? That'd be an unethical thing to do. So what would we give cancer to see what happens? Does anyone know what's the most common animal we use? Yep. Yeah, they typically use rats and mice because they're pretty similar to humans, but you know, we can do it humanely. They're small, they're easy to breed. So yeah, rats and mice. They're very similar to humans. They have all the same parts you do. They look a little different. They're shaped a little different, but yeah, they've got the same. They basically have the exact same body plan you do. They just walk on all four legs and they're little, and they have tails. But you have a little tail too. It's just very small, and it's vestigial. The last bone of your vertebrae swoops up, and it's ready to start to be a tail. And in some people, it does. Something like 1 person in every 1,000 born with a little tail that they have to snip off. That's true. Bet you didn't know that. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, you have all the genes inside your cells. You have all the blueprint to have a nice long monkey-like tail. And for whatever reason, and we don't totally understand, well, at this level of science, we can't totally explain why, but those genes don't get turned on. So you have all the genes inside your body to make a tail, but when you're being developed in the womb, your DNA says, no, don't give this guy a tail. He'll be fine without it. So we do hands-on research. We are in control. Of the materials. And I'm going to use a phrase here that I hope makes sense to you, but I'm going to say this is an active process. And what I mean by that is you are actively physically doing things. You know, if you were doing an experiment in chemistry, which you're going to do, you are actively mixing chemicals and then making observations. You are combining things, you're lighting things on fire, whatever it is you got to do, you're doing it. Yeah. Yep, and we're going to talk about that. Definitely true. Science is the act of trial and error, for sure. Now, sometimes we cannot do an experiment like we would like to. I'll give you an example. My wife is a midwife. I think I've already mentioned it. She delivers babies for me. And one of the things that scientists need to figure out is what kinds of things are dangerous for pregnant women, right? For example, now if you go to a restaurant, they have a sign up behind the bar that says pregnant women should not drink alcohol, right? If you see a pack of cigarettes, it says specifically on it that it can stunt the growth of babies, so pregnant women shouldn't smoke. And if you read the side of labels of some cleaning products, it says don't use this if you're pregnant. Now let me ask you this. Do you think that some scientist said, hey, we want to see if smoking is bad for pregnant women. You 100 women, come here, we're going to make you smoke 20 cigarettes a day. Did they do that? Could you ever ethically do that?
No.
Of course not, right? So sometimes, for reasons of ethics, morality, because it would be wrong, we can't do an experiment. It wouldn't be right to make women do that for the sake of science. Likewise, sometimes it's not because of morals, sometimes it's because of practicality. If I study how lions hunt in the wild, and I set that up as an experiment that I control, and I build a giant jungle of my own making, and get a lion and get a prey and control exactly where the prey goes to see what the lion does? Of course not, right? It's just not practical. I can't physically do that. So if we can't design an experiment, how do we learn about lions and how they hunt? How did we find out that alcohol causes problems with pregnant women? Yes, exactly right. We watch them. And same with the pregnant woman thing. We can't make women drink alcohol to see what happens to the babies, and that would be horrific. What we can do, and exactly what scientists did do, is when a woman goes to the doctors, a scientist would do a study and say, hey, interview them, ask them if they smoke, ask them if they drink alcohol. And then just by doing those interviews, they can learn, oh, we discovered looking back at our data that women who drank alcohol tend to have babies of lower birth, same with smokers. So sometimes when we can't design an experiment, we can just watch it. And we call that an observational study. An observational study. And that's just fancy language for it means we watch something as it happens. This is a passive process. All right? It's a passive process. We aren't in control of everything. It's often done when we can't do a controlled experiment. And we just observe and report. Yeah. I will go back up after you guys. I'm going to keep going for now, but we will come back to it. Sorry, I know you guys have to miss, but I didn't want to run out of time. So an experiment is hands-on. That's when we're in control. We design everything. We make everything go exactly where we want it, and we do testing, very specific. When we can't do that, we do an observational study. It's a passive process. We can't control everything. We but watch things happen. We observe it, and we think about it after. Does that make sense? Now, this is kind of the order in which we try to do things too. What's the first thing we do? Well, there's no point, you ever heard the expression, there's no point reinventing the wheel? You ever heard that expression? Yeah, what's that mean? Excellent. So the first step should always be to do research of literature. Google it, or for a professional scientist, go look at the journal of people who study the same thing you study and see if somebody's already asked the question you've asked and found an answer, right? That's the best first step. If nobody has, then try to set up an experiment. Try to do your own hands-on research where you're in control of everything, because that's going to give you the best possible answer. But if for some reason you can't, whether because it's impractical, maybe it would be too expensive, maybe it'd just be too difficult, maybe it would be immoral. Later on, we're going to talk about something called the Tuskegee syphilis trials. This is an awful, awful thing. Does anyone know what syphilis is? It's a sexually transmitted infection, which causes lifelong health problems. And in the 1950s in America, in the town of Tuskegee, Alabama, a bunch of scientists were interested in knowing how syphilis worked. So they found these men who had syphilis, and instead of treating them, which they could have done, the doctors could have treated and cured them with antibiotics, they didn't. Instead, year after year after year, they made observations. What they wanted to do was scientific research to know what happens when somebody has syphilis over time. How does it affect them? And as a result, they took thousands of people with a disease that we could cure, a preventable disease, and they didn't cure them. Of course, it's horrific, right? It's inhumane. And for the record, it's illegal. I mean, you can't do that, right? Nor should you be able to. It's a crime to do that. We can't use people for research like that. And that is the point where sometimes there's things more important than getting good data, right? So sometimes we have to use lesser methods to collect data so that we can do so in an appropriate manner. Bless you. Now, whether we do an experiment or whether we just do an observational study, you're going to have to make some observations. What are observations? What is an observation? Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, so we watch. Good. We could make some observations in this room right now. What observations can you make about this room at this very moment? Yeah, what do you think? Okay. So let's take a look. Oh, I said about me. Well, that's okay. We'll do the room. So the room has windows. I don't have windows. No. I hate that I laughed at that. Okay. What other observations could we make about this room that we're in right now? What do you think? What you got? Yeah. Oh, it's mellow. I like that. You know, I'm going to pretend these are about me. I have windows, 10, I'm mellow. Yeah. The room now, not me. Okay, whiteboard. Okay, what else? What's the temperature like in here? Oh, sure, the lights are on. Good. What's the temperature like? Sure, so we could say it's kind of warm. It's not cold, it's not hot, it's warm. Would that be fair? Hey, I don't have one in here. Actually, I think I do. Where's the thermostat in here? If I wanted to be more specific, I could go look at the thermostat. What might it tell me about the temperature? Yeah, and what do you think? It might be like 21 degrees in here, maybe 22? No, you don't think so? People are shaking their heads. They don't like my sense of temperature. What do you think? Oh, I got 22.1 and 18. I'm going to split the difference and we'll say 20 degrees Celsius. The number isn't really important, but these are both observations, right? It's an observation to say it's warm. And it's also an observation to say specifically it's 20 degrees. Yeah. Yeah, there's a periodic table on the wall. I'm going to stop writing because I'm lazy, but those are all good. We could keep going all day, right? Somebody could sit here and start counting the holes in the ceiling tile, and by the end of the year, they could tell me there's 2,477,000 something. I don't know. Those are all observations. Now, observations are like a scientist's whole raison d'etre, the whole reason to be, right? Observations are what scientists do. So, when we take observations, what might we use? Now, a lot of you were telling me things you saw, and that's good. We definitely observe things with our eyes. That is true. That's good. What else do we observe things with? Yeah. With touch, for sure, definitely. We could say, I could touch this and say, that's kind of rough. It's funky, it's gritty, right? I could touch this and say that it's smoother. The inside's even smoother still. If I touch this one, it feels kind of lukewarm. This one feels cold, right? So yeah, definitely touch. What are you thinking? Smell, definitely. All right? Trust me, when it's like June in high school and these rooms are like 45 degrees, we'll be using our sense of smell and go, dear God, open the window.
Instructions with the students with the last name from T to Z go to the.
So we can use our eyes. We can use our sense of smell. We can use our sense of touch. What else could we use? What else could we use? Yeah. Taste. Now, I'm going to tell you something. In chemistry class, in this lab, we're not going to taste things. That's going to be a good rule. When we're doing chemistry, no tasting. But realistically, we make taste observations all the time, right? You might go home and mom's made dinner and you go, this tastes amazing. That's an observation. You might go, this tastes terrible. That's also an observation. Hopefully more of the first one, less of the second one. Yeah. Sound. We listen. Good. Those are great. So we make observations with our senses, for sure. Are those the only things we can make observations with? What else? What do you think? Yeah, definitely. Ears for sound. But sometimes, like if I want to know the temperature in here, can I just be like, oh, it's 23? Or can I listen really hard and be like, oh, it's 23? Or look, if I stare really hard at the air, do I know how hot it is? Oh, what do I have to do? Yeah. You can look at your phone. Good. How's your phone know, by the way? Yeah, it takes it from the website. How's the website? What do they have? Satellites help them communicate, for sure. How do they actually see the temperature? See, this is like in the olden days before cell phones. You guys would have gone right to the answer I'm looking for. That's okay. We're going to get that. Yeah, that's right. You look on your phone, which is great. That's what I look on too. Believe it or not, when I wake up in the morning, I don't like go outside and like put my thermometer out and like look at it. No, I check my phone. Luckily, somebody somewhere at a weather testing station in Niagara, and they're all over, they do have a thermometer, and it's connected to the internet, and we can all check it. Right? It just happens. So we can use a thermometer. If I wanted to know how long this is, can I just stare at it? I'd use a ruler. If I want to know how much it weighs, I can say, well, it's kind of light. But if I want a number, what do I need? A scale. Good. Maybe I want to know how much of something there is, right? Like maybe I'm making, I'm doing some chemistry and I need an exact amount. I need 300 milliliters of water. What could I use? A measuring cup. Yeah. Does that make sense? So we can make observations with our senses, but we can also use tools to make observations. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to make a quick note of that. I'm just going to say we can use our 5 senses. Or use, and I'm going to use the word instruments. If you prefer the word tools, that's okay too. But we can use instruments to make measurements. A thermometer is a measuring instrument, as is a scale, as is a ruler. All of these things are measuring instruments. That kind of make sense? Cool. Now, back to this temperature thing. I like the temperature. If I say it's warm in here, is that right? More or less. You might disagree with me, right? You might say, oh, it's kind of cool. And you might say, oh, it's hot. So I'm wearing a sweater. But does that make sense? Am I wrong if I say, assuming this is the real number, is it wrong to say it's 23 degrees on here because the thermometer says it? That can be fair, right? Are those both observations? Is there a difference between those observations? What's the difference? Yeah. Good. Can someone else give me a different example that's the same kind of thing? Where we can take 2 different observations of the same thing.
You can say that with a number probably about
Sure.
this is a very exact estimate.
Yeah. And by the way, even if I wasn't going to estimate, if I just wanted to use a word to say something like that, so maybe let's not do binary. Let's talk about, let's say, a dog. Imagine a dog. If I use the ruler, I could say that that dog is like 3 feet long. Whoa, big dog. But the other observation, I could just say the dog is big. Does that make sense? Or if I had my dog, who is not big, it's like a stupid little thing. She's more like a rat than a dog. Yeah. I could say she's small. Right? She's a little bit. Or I could say she's light. But if I didn't want to say she's light, what else could I say about her? She's tiny, sure. But if I wanted to go the other way, if I wanted to get specific, if I used an instrument to measure her weight, I could say that she's, yeah, she's 4 pounds. 4 pounds of pure fury. Ruby is angry all the time, Ruby. I don't know what she has to be angry about. All she does is walk and eat and sleep. It's a great life. I would love to be my dog. But she does. And she's such a, does anyone else have a little dog? My dog amazes me because she's the littlest thing in the world. But I take her for a walk every morning. And like if she sees other little dogs, she's fine. She's cool. She's friendly. As soon as there's a big dog, my dog thinks like she's ready for a fight. And she like goes up and starts like barking at them and like clipping at their heels. And I'm like, that dog could eat you whole. Just leave it alone. And the big dogs don't even care. They're just like, this thing is so silly and little. Let's go away. Anyway. So these 2 different types of observations, we give them names. And I've given the names here. What are they? Who can read these aloud for me? Yeah.
Qualitative.
Good. Qualitative observations and quantitative. What's the difference? What do those words mean? Yeah.
Qualitative is like quality.
Yeah.
Something, and then quantitative is like how much it is.
Yeah. So this is about its qualities, right? In other words, descriptions. It's shiny, it's heavy, it's light, it smells good, it smells bad. It is hot, it's cold. Does that make sense? Qualities. It's transparent, I can see through it. It's opaque, I can't see through it. Does that make sense? So we're describing qualities. So for example, we could say hot, cold. We could say many. There's lots of those things. There's many of them. We could say few. We could say light or heavy. How do we get these kinds of observations? A qualitative observation like that. Hot, cold, many, few, light, heavy, smart. Maybe not. How do we get those? How do we get those observations? Where do they come from? What do we have to do to get them? What do we think? What do you think? Sure. So if we were talking about light and heavy, we'd lift it up and we'd feel it. Same with hot and cold, right? Yeah. Good. All of these qualitative observations, we have to use our senses. Those were both excellent answers, ladies. Thank you. All right? We're going to have to use our senses to get these observations. Or somebody, right? I mean, maybe you read in a book that gold is really heavy. You didn't use your senses, but somebody did, right? And they wrote it down. So qualitative observations depend on the senses. Now, if a qualitative observation is about qualities, it's about describing things, what is a quantitative observation must be about then? Yeah. Very good. Yeah, we're going to use numbers, right? So it comes from the word quantity, which is probably a word you all know, right? Quantity just means how many. And so I'm going to put in bracket here, numbers. Any observation that involves numbers is quantitative. And we can either do that, sometimes it's as easy as, like if I wanted, a quantitative observation would be that right now there are 23 people in the room, right? Is that a quantitative observation? How do we know again? What's a quantitative observation it uses? Numbers. So is that a quantitative observation, 23 people in the room? You bet, right? Not a trick question, I'm not tricking you. I'm not tricky. I'm not smart enough to be tricky. How did I get that number? What did I do? Yeah, so sometimes it just means counting. If we count, that is quantitative. And so that still uses our senses, really, doesn't it? So sometimes this involves using our senses because I have to use my eyes to count, or maybe my ears, right? Like if you think about it, if I said, how many times did Mr. Orlando clap and asked you all to shut your eyes, could you do it? Yeah, you could just listen and keep count, right? But we have to use a sense to count something. But it can also mean measuring. And maybe more often it means measuring. And to do that, we use an instrument of some sort. And I want to just mention here, when we see the word measuring, what do we think of? Yeah, we think of length, right? Because also elementary school, if they say measure this thing, what they meant was measure how long it is. In scientific terms, measuring is broader than that. Measuring is anytime we use an instrument to get a quantitative observation. In other words, a thermometer also measures something. A thermometer measures the temperature, the heat. Good. A weigh scale also measures something. It measures its weight, mass. Good. Both good answers. You know, a measuring cup, right there in the name, it measures volume, right? How much liquid you have. In grade 8 math, you do all kind of volume calculations. Is that true? You're like length times width times height gives you the volume of a rectangular prism. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we can measure volume. So anytime we measure something, we use an instrument. Right? Does that make sense? The speedometer on your car, it measures speed. Does that make sense? Cool. And the last thing I want to say is this, and then we're going to actually get up and do a little bit of very simple observing work. I don't have everyone's lab safety stuff in just yet, so we can't be, you know, lighting things on fire yet, but we'll get there. But in the meantime, how do we know if an observation is a good one or a bad one? Yep, so does it make sense? What else do you think? Sorry? You can ask other people, you can compare. Is it relevant? Good. And I would say this too. Good observations are, and I'm going to say this, what word did I want to use? See, I had a whole thought about this. See, I prepare these lessons, and now I'd have to go through my book. The word I wanted to use was, I got I am writing it down right now on my tablet. You guys are all seeing it up there. Well, I'm not allowed to think for a minute? Come on. Do you think I like, I'm a robot? This stuff just comes to me automatically? I do have to practice. You know, do you guys know I get to like 7 a.m. I straight up practice these. I like go through and walk through. That doesn't mean I'm going to memorize every word. Good observations are consistent. And here's what I mean by that. And this is true for qualitative or quantitative. If we made a good observation, if I went over and measured the length of your piece of paper and I said it's 8.5 inches, and then she goes over and measures it with the ruler, what number should she get? 8.5 inches. And if he goes over and measures it with the ruler, what should he get? It should be consistent. It shouldn't matter who's taking the observation. It should be consistent. Does that make sense? Now, with instruments, it's pretty easy to keep that in line, right? As long as we make sure that all the rulers are made the same length, everyone should get the same answer, right? Shouldn't matter if he uses his ruler and I use mine, it should be the same. Some instruments, we have to be careful. I was in Haiti over the summer and I gave blood. I donated blood, and they put me on a scale there and it said I was 170 pounds. Now, that's nice of it to say, but it's not true. I'd like it to be true, but I weigh a lot more than that. Scale wasn't accurate. And if I had stepped on the scale next to it, it probably would have said something different. They hadn't calibrated their scales well, right? I don't know if you have a scale at home, but you have to make sure it's calibrated. You know, and here in the lab, we have these scales in the back, and every few months I have to go on and calibrate where it says take everything off, you zero. Then we have a very specifically 5-gram weight, and I put that on, and I press OK. And now it knows that's exactly 5 grams. And I put a 10-gram weight on, and I press the button. And now it's calibrated, and we know it's accurate. And everyone has to do that with their scales. Does that make sense? And if people don't do that, if we measure incorrectly, if our observations aren't consistent, we can end up with mistakes. Mistakes are dangerous. You know? You want the guy who's building your bridge to build it really carefully. You want the pilot who's flying your plane, you want to make sure that altimeter saying how high up he is, you want that to be right. Anyone miss pictures? Cool. So it's important that good observations are consistent. It is easier with instruments than not. But so here's what I would say. If I ate an apple and I said like, oh, this tastes sugary and acidic, everyone should find that same thing, right? Everyone who eats an apple should go like, yeah, definitely. There's sugar in there and there's an acidic flavor to it. On the other hand, if I ate an apple and said, that's delicious, I love it, is that a good scientific observation? No, right? Because you might taste it and go, oh, not so much. Likewise, if we're describing the temperature in here, if we have a thermometer, that's great. That's bound to be a good observation. As long as that thermometer has been set up properly, we can get the number. On the other hand, if I came in here wearing my winter jacket and a scarf and a hat, and I went, oh, it's so hot in here, right? And then on the other hand, somebody comes in with like ice packs taped to their legs and chest and arms, and like with 3 fans blowing on them, they go, it's freezing in here. Has the temperature in the room changed in either case? No, the problem is actually with the observation. Does that make sense? So when we make scientific observations, we try to stick to things that everyone would say the same. In other words, we know opinions. An opinion is not an observation. All right? Mr. Lando is dressed nicely today. That's an opinion. It's a correct one, but still, it's an opinion. Right? Now, it would be just an observation to say like, oh, he's wearing a shirt. It has a collar. It's blue and has yellow and white bits on it. Those are good observations. Does that make sense? And you have to watch out. This happens all the time. Opinion-based observations. And we want to watch out for them. Does that make sense? All right. So I am done spielifying for today. This is an important thing. We are going to constantly come back during this course to observations and types. And I will tell you right now, when we do a lab, you know, in our chemistry unit, I'm going to say, hey, these are the qualitative observations I want you to make. These are the quantitative observations I want you to make. And we need to know them. And we always want to make sure they're good ones. So right now, I've set up just on the back lab tables, I've put just a bunch of objects, different objects. There's like golf balls and strips of metal and glass rods and goggles and erasers and things like that. I just want you to get in the habit of making qualitative observations and good ones. Again, like I don't want you to pick this up and say like, oh, it's pretty. Is that a good scientific observation? No. What qualitative observation can I make about this? It is shiny. That's true. Everyone has to agree with that. But that definitely is shiny. Yeah, it's rectangular. Good. Describing its shape. What else? Good. Yeah. It's gray. It's shiny. It's gray. It's rectangular. I could say like it's smooth on this side. Interestingly, it's actually rough on that side. So it's like two different textures. Yeah, it's a big 3D shape. Those are all good observations, and they're all qualitative. If I wanted to make a quantitative observation of this, what could I do with this one? Quantitative. I don't think it's hideous, by the way. It's a very nice piece of wood. But quantitative. What does quantitative mean again? Quantitative? I don't know. Numbers. Yeah, numbers. Good. So what's a quantitative observation I can make? That's not a number. That's a qualitative observation. It's not a number. There's only one of them. That's quantitative. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has 6 sides. 6 faces. That's quantitative. What else could I do? What else could I do? I could weigh it. I could put it on here and say, hey, this block of aluminum weighs 98.8 Great. Quantitative? Sure. What else could I do with it? Yeah, I could say it is 5.8 centimeters long. I could say it's 3.1 centimeters wide. I could say it's 1.9 centimeters tall. Does that make sense? Hey, for those quantitative observations, I was either counting or I was doing what? I was measuring. When I measure something, what do I have to use? A ruler or a scale or something. What do we call these collectively? Very good. I have to use an instrument to measure. Does that make sense? So your task for today is I want you to come back here and pick any 5 objects you want. Tell me what the object is. And I want you to make 2 quantitative observations. What are quantitative again? Quantitative again? No, quantitative.
Oh.
Quantitative. How many? Measurements. Numbers, right? Quantitative uses numbers. So whatever object you pick, you're going to make 2 quantitative observations, and you're going to make 3 qualitative observations. What are qualitative observations again? Good description. And we want to make some of the good ones. No, I think it's pretty. No heavy. Heavy is too bland, right? Things that everyone would agree on. Because you might think it's heavy, but I'm so strong, I think it's light. That's one of the first things people notice. So, that's your task. Then, when you go home today for homework, nice easy one, I want you to pick 3 objects at home. Yeah, and you're going to make 2 quantitative observations and 3 qualitative observations about that. Does anyone have any questions? Get to it.
I'm not.
I tried to remember words to describe a property. I can't ask you about it. But if you call them wires, I'm okay with that.
I mean, my
Don't cut yourself.
I said, let's finish my part.
Is it sharp on the edge? Not too bad. What do you got? In fact, not so shiny it is, yeah.
One side, the other side.
Oh, wood cylinder. You know what? I actually don't mind squishy. I know when you say squishy, I know exactly what it is. I know when I pick it up, I'm gonna be able to go like this, and then when I let go, it kind of, right? All right. Yeah, I can go with squishy. You don't have to be scientific. No problem. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow. For now, you can look right off here. The other thing is this program I use OneNote. You are actually signed up for it, and from any computer anywhere ever, you can always see these notes and get caught up on them. But for now, you can just use here. No problem. Come on, there we go. Sorry, I'm just gonna stop.